except for the occasional toad other places. But then, yeah, we got so many snakes on that trip. So many snakes. Yeah.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BioBlitz Oklahoma podcast. I'm Priscilla Crawford, co-coordinator of BioBlitz Oklahoma and a conservation biologist at the Oklahoma Biological Survey. This podcast is an extension of our BioBlitz Oklahoma events. Now we can celebrate Oklahoma's biodiversity with you all year round. In these podcasts, we will chat with our biodiversity experts, answer biodiversity questions, and let you know about biodiversity and community science projects that you can join. In this Meet the Expert episode, I chat with my friend and colleague, Jessa Watters, who loves to dive for turtles, dash for lizards, and grab a hold of snakes. So let's get started.
My name is Jessa Watters. I work at the Sam Noble Museum on the OU campus. I have been there for 11 years, and I am the collection manager for herpetology.
Thank you. Welcome, Jessa, to our BioBlitz Oklahoma podcast. Jessa is our herpetology team leader for fall BioBlitz events and our spring virtual events, too, that we've had on iNaturalist for the past several years. Herpetology is a term that most people don't come across every day. So could you explain a little bit about what herpetology actually is?
Herpetology is the study of reptiles and amphibians, and the root word actually comes from Latin herpeton, which means to creep or to crawl. So historically, reptiles and amphibians were lumped together because they were like the creepy crawly things. But biologically, they're actually quite distinct, and most people tend to specialize in one or the other. It's not very common to really specialize in both because they are really quite different in terms of life history and evolutionary tracks and everything.
I didn't realize about the root word. That's cool, to creepy crawly things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jess and I have actually been friends for the past several years, and you probably blame me for your daughter's fervent desire for backyard chickens right now. And we've been roommates at the OU's biological station at Lake Texoma, where we teach our field classes. I don't know a lot of your backstory. I love to hear people's backstory and how they got interested in what they know so much about. And some people come to biology through like great teachers, or they went on a camping trip with their super outdoorsy uncle one year when they were a kid. I know that I wanted to be a scientist since I was like in kindergarten, when we had this puddle in our backyard full of tadpoles. And although I wandered from interest in amphibians, eventually to astronomy, and then to botany, and kind of lumped it all up to ecology. So that's kind of how I got interested very long time ago. How did you get interested in biology?
So I grew up on a farm in rural Ohio, and so I spent my whole childhood outside, as was normal in the 80s, and on a farm. And my family did lots of camping and hiking and things like that. And so at some point, I'm not entirely sure when, but at some point in the elementary age, I started getting really into turtles. That turtles were my favorite animal, obsessed with having turtles, turtle statues, and turtle stuffed animals. And every time we went on vacation, I would beg to have more turtles from every location we went and things like that. And so when I was in middle school is kind of when I definitely settled on, okay, I'm going to be a biologist. Like, I love animals, all animals, turtles are great. I'm going to be a biologist. And definitely had that track even by middle school for sure. And then in high school is when I learned that herpetology was a subfield of biology. And it just kind of like blew my mind that you could actually specialize in just that category, you know, when you start learning about the ologies. And so I was like, okay, that's it. That's what I'm going to do. And for colleges was always looking at like small liberal arts schools, because that's where my mom had went, and I was very shy, and a small school seemed like a good idea. And so I actually ended up settling on one Earlham College that actually had not only a herpetologist on staff, but like an internationally known turtle biologist. And I was like, this is it. This is the place for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really unusual, that I think that somebody knows exactly what they're interested in. Like turtles going into college. I think when I started college, I thought for a very brief period that I wanted to study English literature, which was a huge mistake. And unfortunately, I found my way back to biology. So now that you are a professional biologist, so you went to Earlham College and you got your bachelor's, and then you went on to a graduate school, right?
Yes, I got my master's at the University of New Hampshire. And for that, I studied feeding behavior and kind of like also just generalized behaviors between differences between adults and hatchlings, brand new hatchlings and neonates for species that were live born in a group of lizards called Scolopus lizard. So not quite turtles, and then do all the schooling back in New Hampshire.
Jumping back and forth from the desert to the eastern deciduous forest.
Yeah, to New England.
So now that you're a professional herpetologist, what do you actually do day to day?
So in the museum world, you don't necessarily do the same things that you would be doing if you were like actively only being a herpetologist, like out in the world, only doing research. And so I do research mainly around Oklahoma for conservation related projects in amphibian and infectious disease, and a lot of recent projects on learning about horned lizards in the state, which are in decline. And also we've done some environmental DNA sampling, which is when you take water samples from ponds and then actually screen the water samples for genetic material for the species that you care about to try to find if a species lives in a pond, even if you never see it. So all of that I've been doing recently, but honestly, that's kind of a side part of my job. It's the fun part, I think, in many ways, but it's not my main duties. My main duties are caring for the collection of specimens themselves, which we have about 58,000 specimens in our collection. Most of them are fluid-based specimens, so they're in alcohol.
In jars, right?
Yes, in jars, in alcohol, 70%. And so you actually end up spending a lot of time taking care of the specimens themselves, specimen integrity, and working on the data that goes along with them. We have a database that we track everything under the sun related to the specimens. Not just like what day you caught them on or where, but also all kinds of morphometric measurements, all the associated samples like swabs and tissues, habitat, prey, if we've done stomach content analysis.
I think a lot of people don't realize like how important it is to, like how much work there is related to maintaining a collection. I think a lot of people like, oh, you got them, you put them in the collection and there they sit.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot more that needs to be done to make sure that the specimens stay nice. And then if anything was caught a long time ago, none of that information is in like a database. So all of that has to be added to databases too.
Right. Yeah. And luckily, when I took the job in 2009, their data, even the oldest stuff, was already in electronic format.
Oh, okay.
For the most part, what we did do later was go back through like old handwritten field notes and try to add back in some of the notes about habitat or morphometrics, because that did not used to be part of the main catalog. We added that later.
Yeah.
During my time, actually. And so we do even have to go back to the originals. And the data in many cases is as valuable as or more valuable than the specimens themselves. And lots of people do a lot of really data heavy projects using our material where they're looking at ecological niche modeling and or changes in diversity over time. Without a museum and the associated data, we wouldn't really be able to track things like species decline and changes with climate change and things like that without that museum background.
Right.
And so that's another big part of it as well.
You mentioned field notes, and over the past few years, I've really become interested in kind of the historical importance of field journals.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, like when we were in our undergraduate and kind of graduate school careers, I feel like field journals were considered kind of old-fashioned, that most of the data that we collected were kind of on specific data sheets that were really important to like a particular experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Do you keep like a field journal, like where you just take notes on specimens? How does that work for you guys?
It really depends on what we're working on at the time. If I'm just kind of out and about on my own, then yeah, I use like a small write in the rain notebook that I keep in my backpack and just take general notes or jot down GPS coordinates and general thoughts and things like that. But if it's like specific to, okay, we're in the field, we're at this pond and we're taking samples for our infectious disease projects, then we do have data sheets that kind of go along with that. So I would say it's a mixture. It really is. But we do have space in our data sheets for general notes, because sometimes you don't know what's going to be important until later. And I'm a really big proponent of recording everything all the time. You can work with it after the fact, but if you never recorded it in the first place, then it's gone, you know.
Being a museum person that deals with other people's data so often, it seems like that you would be much more interested in making sure that that data gets collected.
Yeah.
You hinted at some of the projects that you were working on. In fact, you and I kind of collaborated on one of those eDNA projects where we were looking at invasive plants and trying to figure out if we could find invasive plants in lakes that we couldn't see, that were maybe like upstream or far away.
Mm-hmm.
That was a little iffy, and we didn't have great success, but that's science and that's research, so that's okay. That's a relatively new technique in your projects, and then me with mine, we were trying to figure out how that technique was going to work for us. Is that one of the kind of most exciting new things that you have worked on? This was not a technique that you would have learned about in graduate school. It's so new. What kinds of kind of innovations and new things have you been able to explore since you learned about things back in the 80s?
Yeah. Both my undergraduate and my master's degree were both like ecology heavy. Everything was outside, everything was about the organisms themselves. And so I, other than like taking a single genetics class in undergrad, had zero experience with that side of things, because it wasn't what I was interested in. Things were available, not necessarily eDNA. You're right, that people didn't really know about that yet, but people could specialize and do tons of things with genetics. It just wasn't my interest. So I ignored all of those extra classes and extra, research opportunities, and really focused on the field angle. And so it wasn't until Cameron Seiler, our current herpetology curator at the museum, came on that it really became part of my job as well, is that I needed to understand the genetic side of things in order to do my job to the best possible extent. That it couldn't just be going out and collecting and sticking them in a museum, because that's not what museums are anymore. Museums are everything. And our museum has a tissue collection where all the different life sciences collections deposit their tissues into that single tissue collection, and it has its own manager. But we also have swabs that basically almost every animal gets anywhere from 1 to 3 swabs taken every time. And so in order to look at disease, microbial communities that live on the skin or in the gut, and all of that I knew nothing about. I didn't know how to take a swab or extract DNA from a swab. And so I had to kind of learn all of that in almost like a crash course, so that then I could start training all of the undergraduates in our lab as well on all these techniques. It's been a huge learning curve for me from like 2015 till now. Basically lots of all these genetics that I didn't know about, all kinds of terms that I knew nothing about, and all the machinery that we didn't even have in the museum that we got when Cameron started, that's all kind of part of it now, and I didn't know any of it.
Well, a lot of people think that when you finish school, you're kind of like finished learning, but I think that's a really good example of, especially in kind of science, where you have to continue to learn new techniques and new ways of doing things, and even new ideas
Mm-hmm.
for some of our groups of species. So yeah, it doesn't end.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wish it would.
No, it doesn't. Related to that, the way we store things in the museum is based on their taxonomy, and the taxonomy changes as the phylogenetic relationships between organisms change. The names get changed, or new species come out, and so then you have to learn all the new names, and then you have to actually physically rearrange the collection based on the new names, and so yeah, it doesn't stop. It goes all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, we have the exact same problem in botany. We've shuffled around the herbarium specimens based on the changes of plant families, and sometimes you just kind of leave them and hope that somebody else will come back and re-examine it and decide that one old thing is still the same. Yeah. So you focused on field biology when you were an undergrad.
Mm-hmm.
You said that that's the fun part. Uh, a lot of, and most field biologists feel the same way. I mean, we have to do things inside. We love being outside, and every time you get a group of field biologists together, like at BioBlitz, they love telling stories about the days in their field. And especially now that we're kind of limited in what we were able to do this year because of the pandemic. I feel like people are trying to swap stories more often, both kind of like scary things that happened to them in the field, or like amazing things like, I can't believe I saw this. Do you have a favorite story to share with us about a memorable day in the field?
So when I was in the southeast corner of Arizona doing field work for my master's, I had quite a few really interesting animal encounters. So the research was in the Chiricahua Mountains, which are these really, really high mountains that otherwise below the mountain is basically open desert. There's really, really unique animals in the mountains because it's so far above the desert, and it's completely different plant communities, everything. And so they're called sky islands because basically they work just like an island does, and that dispersal between the mountains can be very difficult because it's crossing open desert versus the high mountains. And so there's a lot of really cool wildlife there that otherwise is only found, for example, in Mexico and Central America. And so people actually come from all over the US to go to those mountains to see really interesting birds and other sort of things. And one example of that is the trogon, which is like a bird that is otherwise only in Central and South America. People consider it to be one of those life birds. I saw them like every week. And so it was just like really funny. And I'm not a bird person, so that, it doesn't matter. But we also had coatis, which I had one like jump out from a bush at me one day. And that was really, it was just like startling. Like there was just all this noise, and all of a sudden this like thing came out, and you're like, what the heck is that? 'Cause it's like such a funny looking little animal. But the craziest day was when my field site, I had 2 field sites, and they were all along dry creek beds, just because the creek beds only have water in them for like 2 months of the year, basically. And so they're perpetually dry creek beds, and the lizards lived on top of the rocks and would go in the crevices. And so I spent every day in the field just going up and down these creek beds looking for lizards. And so one day I was, a ways away from where the car was or anything like that. And I turned a corner because I couldn't really see around the corner, but the stream meandered that way. And so I turned a corner and I heard something, and I look up, and just over, because these creek beds are in a little bit of a divot, and just going up over the edge, the ridge, was the backside of a mountain lion.
Oh my.
Yeah. And I was not far away from it, but it was walking away. And so clearly it had heard me coming as I clumped down this dry, the rocks and the dry
right.
stream bed, and did not want to have anything to do with me. But it really startled me because I was alone, completely alone, and would have had like good distance back to the car, of hiking.
Yeah.
It was just shocking, but you don't really stop. Like I stopped for the day. I was like, felt like I had a heart attack. And so I was done that day, but then you have to keep going, like you can't just,
right.
Yeah, you're like, oh, mountain lions live here. And people had talked about it, and I think that summer I was the only one that had seen one that summer, because I was based out of a biological station. And so there were a lot of other biologists there doing other things in same habitats or different habitats. And so it was the hot news of the summer that I saw a mountain lion, but I only saw the back end of it. Yeah.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I have heard people say that if they want to eat you, you won't know what hit you.
Yeah.
You will not see them before they attack you.
Yeah.
Did you see that viral video that people posted? Yeah. And that was totally a mom trying to defend her young. People are silly.
Yeah.
But that's a cool story. I'm glad you saw the backside.
Yeah.
And it must know that you would come through every day, or
I don't know, because they have huge territories and they move a lot.
That's true.
So it may never have encountered me before, for all I know. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, I haven't seen a mountain lion in the wild. I have heard people tell me that they have seen mountain lions. Actually, what people mostly say are that they see black panthers. They're like, well, I saw a black panther along the river. And I'd be like, well, I'm pretty sure and that, you know, sometimes you can't convince people, but have you had people try to convince you that they've seen certain things? Like, you must get lots of rattlesnake reports.
Yeah, and I've always heard about weird alligator reports because we do have alligators in Oklahoma,
Right.
but every once in a while there's these reports that they're so far outside of their range, or it was a log.
Like a pond in Edmond.
Yeah, there was, I think, a report from like north of Oklahoma City, and there's been some reports from Tulsa, and I can't really substantiate any of any of that.
Yeah, we do have some breeding ones though down the very southeast, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, and I have seen those, and in McCurtain County, and they may range a little ways from McCurtain County. And there's also historical records that they were in the Red River, and so that there may be some in the Texoma area, but no one has seen them for an extremely long time in the Texoma area. So it's probably unlikely that they're there. The population is actively breeding in McCurtain County at a few different locations, at the Red Slough and at the Little River National Wildlife Refuge as well. They have a breeding population.
Well, maybe while we teach down at the biological station, we'll finally get to see one.
Yeah.
That would be super cool. Although it might limit the students swimming in the lake.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're from Ohio, and that you came here for your job at the museum, right?
Mm-hmm.
So had you been to Oklahoma before you moved here? Like,
yes.
What did you know about Oklahoma before you came to the state? And what kind of like misconceptions did you have about Oklahoma before you got here?
So probably like everybody else, I thought it was mainly tornadoes and flat. But I had been here, but only along the eastern edge from a childhood vacation where we went to the Ozarks, and we were in Missouri, but we took like a day trip across the border into Oklahoma, probably for some destination that I have now since forgotten. And then I had driven through to go to Arizona both times.
Oh, okay.
Because I would drive from New Hampshire to Arizona with my field gear and everything. And so I had done the whole I-40, or maybe I took 44 and then I-40 and then kept going west forever, but that's still mostly flat. It's a lot of openness. And
yeah,
but I have enjoyed, once I got here, like how interesting it is just going from east to west, all the different habitats, and seeing the mountains, and then seeing kind of in the west all the like the plateaus and crazy rock formations.
Oh yeah.
Only in 2019 did I actually visit the Gypsum Hills area where all the like salt crystals are in the ground and things like that. And that was super interesting as well.
Do you get different reptiles and amphibians on the Gypsum?
Lots and lots of snakes. We had like really good snake success on that trip. And then in like ditches near the roads, water would form, and we would find like spadefoot toads and things like that in the ditches. There weren't a lot of open ponds really, other than I'm sure people had them on the ranch land, but we weren't in the ranches.
Right.
But yeah, so it was really like roadside ditches where we were finding the amphibians, except for the occasional toad other places. But then yeah, we got so many snakes on that trip, so many snakes. And skinks, lots of skinks.
During your field work, you get to go all across the state, from very southeastern to the very tip of the panhandle. And what's your favorite place to explore in Oklahoma?
I would say almost anywhere in eastern Oklahoma is great, because I think I still like really love deep down like a forest, Yeah, growing up in Ohio and all those years in New England, that you just really love a forest that's green and lush. And in eastern Oklahoma, especially kind of like in the northeast, Oklahoma has really high densities of salamanders. And so if you're out on a good evening where the weather's just right and it's moist, you're just like walking on a trail and they're just walking next to you down the trail. Or if you're along like a rock face, they're in every crevice. And so you can just see so much in a really short amount of time. The Cookson Hills area is amazing for that.
Okay, Cookson Hills. I was just about to ask where somebody would go to see salamanders strolling the trail with them.
Yeah. And then the Ozark Plateau National Wildlife Refuge is also really good for that.
Yeah.
Both of those are really great. And then the Ozark Plateau also has some caves as well. So then you can get some of the cave salamanders if you're lucky. Of course, now nobody's going into caves because of bats, but
right. The Ozark Plateau National Wildlife Refuge, I think, was set up mostly to protect the endangered bat species that are in the limestone caves there. And I think they've gated a lot of them, so you're not allowed to, and they don't advertise like where a lot of them are either, so that those are protected. But the ones that people know about, I have been in a few just kind of like not true caves, kind of more like shelves of limestone, and I've even seen a few of those cool salamanders.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that in Oklahoma, we don't really have any that are cave obligates per se. They'll come a little ways out from the cave as well. And some of them even will just be in crevices in rock faces, but also be in the cave. And so you can still get at quite a lot without having to really go in the cave.
Oh, okay. Experience going into Eastern Oklahoma as a kid, kind of at least warned you, let you know that Oklahoma did have trees. What I remember before I came to Oklahoma, years before I even came for graduate school, I met a forestry student from Oklahoma State. I was working in Colorado and she was a forestry student, and I just laughed at her. I'm like, ha ha ha, boy, you studied forestry in Oklahoma. And she tried to convince me that they had forests here, but I wasn't convinced at the age of 21 that there were trees in Oklahoma. That's not what I saw in the musical.
Which I've actually never seen. I'm probably like a bad Oklahoman now.
You've never seen the, well, it's the theme song is our state song, which I think is the best state song in the United States. I mean, it's the best state song. Before I moved to Oklahoma, I had like everything packed up, and I watched Twister, the movie, like the week before I came. I knew it was goofy, but I thought it was kind of appropriate too. Okay, so now we're at our quick question round. So these are just kind of some fun quick questions that you can elaborate on or just have some really quick answers to them too. So what has been the most exciting organism you have seen in the wild?
This is not going to be like a herp answer.
Oh, that's okay.
Well, I mean, it kind of is. But anyways, going to undergrad at Earlham College, I had some amazing opportunities for study abroad. They really push it at Earlham. And they actually, a few years ago, got a monstrous donation that now every single student who wants to can go study abroad.
Wow.
And you can basically get a scholarship to do it. I did not have that luxury. But so while in undergrad, I did a semester-long program in Kenya. And so I've done the whole safari thing.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I have everything you can think of that lives in Africa. I probably saw it because we were there for 3 months and we moved around quite a bit. And we even, there's this one park called Hell's Gate National Park where there are no large predators that live there, no lions, no jaguars, no nothing like that. So it's actually safe to camp in and to be out and about on foot, not just in a van. And so we did like little miniature research projects. We did ours on zebras.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and so you would follow a zebra herd and take data. Pretty amazing. The school also has a program called May Term, where basically the graduation is normally like the first weekend in May, and then the next 3 weeks of May that are after the semester's over, you could take another class similar to OU's intersession, and a lot of those were study abroad as well because they were shorter and therefore more affordable for many people. And so I actually, the year I graduated as a senior, so I technically had graduated but still had this one class, I did a May term in the Galapagos.
Well, wow. Okay, you're hitting like all the biology hotspots.
Yeah. So it was a 3-week trip, but the first week was in mainland Ecuador, and we went up in the mountains, and that was pretty awesome too. And then we did 2 weeks in the islands, and we lived on boats, and you go every day to a different island. So basically they drive the boats at night, and you wake up the next morning and you're on a different island. Most of the time, every once in a while we stayed put, but I, saw tortoises in the wild, and we also went to like a breeding facility, and you got to hold like the baby tortoises.
Oh.
And I went to the Charles Darwin Research Center as well. And I also went to, which at the moment my brain is not remembering the name of it, but the island where where the Grants did their famous research that was in the beak of the finch.
Oh yeah.
And that island, is not on like a normal tourist route. You have to like get special permission to go, and really only biologists bother. But it was a biology class, so we went,
right,
and kind of got to experience that. And if you have read that book, or they talk about how they had to like disembark from the boats onto like basically jagged cliffs. Yeah, I got to do that. It's pretty hard. Yeah. And then you hike up, and then you get onto the top, and there's like a bit of a kind of shallow caldera from an old volcano, and that's where all the birds are. And so had some pretty amazing experiences. And yes, reading The Beak of the Finch was part of the class. Yeah. with regular discussions and everything.
So you've seen many exciting organisms,
Yeah.
and maybe we should just skip the next quick question, which is, what is on your natural history bucket list?
No, I do have answers for that. I really want to go to, and this one is a tie. I don't know which one I want to go to the most, but I really want to go to both Australia and New Zealand, just because everything is so different there, and I need to see it. Like I want to see a miniature continent dominated by marsupials would be just fantastic. Yeah, New Zealand is just looks amazing, and then I would like to see the tuataras, or this crazy outgroup of reptiles that are not like anything else on Earth that's alive today, and that would be pretty amazing to see them in New Zealand. So yeah, both of those.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad you haven't decided you've seen it all.
No, I haven't given up yet.
So what advice would you give to someone who wants to become an expert in your field? I'm talking not only about like little kids, but also like adults who are interested in learning about herpetology as an adult.
I think the main thing is to not try to learn about it in a classroom situation, or a lab or things like that, but to really be outside, which is probably an answer for every biologist. But I think really for herps, you don't really get a good appreciation until you've held a toad in your hand or a snake in your hand. I think you just don't really get that love for them until you've gone out and experienced it. And we have like amazing diversity for herps in Oklahoma, and so it's not hard to get out and see some really cool stuff here. But like for anyone that's going into it like as a career, like college students and things like that, is that they need to just get the experience that like just sitting in a classroom and taking a course, even if you take a herpetology course, it's not really enough. You have to get out and you have to do more if you're going to make it your life's career.
Yeah, getting that hands-on experience outside of the classroom, I think, is really important for probably for most careers. Just knowing what the world is really like if you take on that subject versus what you learn in a classroom. I think most people realize as they get older that the classroom setting is so artificial compared to what a job would really be like.
Yeah, and I know like with so many people have a fear of snakes, and even teaching field herpetology, that almost half the class every year shows up and tells me they're afraid of snakes and they're not going to touch a snake. And then I just, work at them for 2 weeks, and by the end, everyone's done it. If you just try it, it's all doable,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of people don't know how to pick up a snake,
right?
So they won't get bit.
Right.
I mean, I'm not super fond of picking up wildlife and holding it. That's probably why I'm a plant person, but I'm not scared of it. I just don't know how to do it. And it makes me nervous that one, I'll hurt the organism, or two, it'll hurt me.
Yeah. The funny thing is, I actually in field herp always let myself get bit at some point. Obviously not by anything venomous. We're hyper cautious with venomous snakes.
Of course.
But if they see you get bit and like not react, it works wonders.
Oh yeah.
And then they'll see the little puncture holes, and they're like, oh, they're so small. And I'm like, yeah, they are. Yeah, and it sounds funny, but pretty much every year I've let myself get bit. Yeah, or the TAs have. Yeah.
No, that's not a learning technique I would have, like, it totally makes sense. Just kind of normalizes, like, yeah, animals will bite you when you try to hold them, and it's not a big deal unless it's the copperhead.
Right. We definitely, we don't even let students near them. So that part, avoid it entirely. Yes.
Okay, last quick question. What's the next thing you want to learn? And this doesn't have to be related to biology. one of the reasons why I asked this question is to kind of show people that there are multifaceted biologists out there. But if it's related to biology, that's good too.
Yeah. I have an answer for that I think is going to make you laugh. But I think my next thing to learn is how to raise chickens.
I thought your daughter did an excellent PowerPoint presentation on how to raise chickens.
Yes, she did. Yes, my daughter got really into decided that we needed chickens and spent the whole summer of COVID doing research on chickens, but we've kind of committed as a family and we've actually already done a pre-order for chickens to arrive in February. So we will be chicken owners and I'm kind of looking forward to it. And also has a learning experience for her as well. By the time they arrive, she'll be 10. So she's going to be very involved in the process. And we're building the coop ourselves. And so all of that is kind of a big adventure for right now.
Yeah.
And all the eggs we can eat after eventually.
Well, chickens, they're closely related to dinosaurs, and that's like herps, right?
Yeah. They do look like little, their feet in particular definitely look like raptors. Yeah.
One of our chickens is molting right now, so it has about half of its feathers, and it definitely looks like a dinosaur. It looks weird, poor little chicken, but hopefully they'll come in before all the feathers will come in before the winter. Okay, well that wraps it up. Thanks, Jessa.
Oh yeah, no problem.
And thanks to everyone who listened to our new BioBlitz Oklahoma podcast. We have several more Meet the Expert episodes lined up for you in the coming week. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen so that you are notified when we upload more episodes. You can also stay up to date on our Facebook page, BioBlitz Oklahoma, and on Twitter at OKBioBlitz, and of course on our website, biosurvey.ou.edu/BioBlitzOK. Don't worry, all these will be in the show notes for your reference. Angelina Stancampiano, my BioBlitz co-coordinator and Sequoia State Park naturalist, and I are working together on Ask the Expert episodes. Do you have a burning question about Oklahoma's biota? Curious about some natural history phenomenon that you have observed? Send us your questions and we will work on answering them in future Ask the Expert episodes. You can send Facebook messages, tweet at us, or simply email your questions to me at prill, Prill, @ou.edu. We'll also be happy to receive suggestions for future expert interviews and projects to highlight. Well, that wraps it up for this episode. Thanks again to Jessa Watters, our herpetology team leader, for joining us on Meet the Experts. This podcast is a project of BioBlitz Oklahoma, an outreach program of the Oklahoma Biological Survey at the University of Oklahoma. We hope you have time to step outside today and explore Oklahoma's amazing biodiversity. Remember, you can find biodiversity right outside your own door.